Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Well, sadly, we are coming to the very end of this series that we've had on the Sermon on the Mount. It feels like we've just scratched the surface and already we are at the end. And so I hope you've had a good time. I hope you've been able to find the time to be able to sit with this greatest of all sermons, to be able to allow it to kind of marinate your heart and your soul, your mind as you sit with it. You know, the things that we see, the things that we give ourselves to, those things are the things that go into shaping us to be the kinds of people that we are. We become different people because of the things that we see and hear and do. So this opportunity with the Sermon on the Mount, this great summary of the teaching of Jesus, to be able to sit with it and to read it every day over a period of time, over the period of a month, to be able to read it slowly and just allow it to penetrate us. It will change your life. You'll become a different person to the extent that you've been able to just receive the teaching of Jesus and allow it to be assimilated into who you are. So we're now at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and what I'd like to do is to go to the very end, which isn't in the passage for this morning. You know, the Sermon on the Mount starts with the Beatitudes at the beginning. Blessed are the meek, blessed are those who mourn. But at the end, there's another gem, another jewel that helps us to be able to understand the entire sermon that goes before it. So I'd like to just kind of look at that because that's what Jesus wants to make sure that we understand, and then come back to the passage for this morning so that it has more context for us. So at the very end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells the parable or the story of two builders. There is one builder who is a foolish guy. And this foolish guy, you'll remember, builds his house on sand. And so he builds this house on sand. It's a very nice house, I'm sure. But the winds come and the waves smash against it. And this house, we're told, just kind of crashes, makes a great crash. Then there's another guy. And this guy we're told he's the wise man. He's the wise builder. And he builds this house. Now his houses, I think they're the same house probably, but he builds this house on a rock. And that rock, when the winds come and the storms blow, that house, because it's built on the rock, is able to stand. And so then the question is, what is the difference between those two guys? We know that one is building on the rock, but one's on the sand. But what is it that is the rock versus the sand? What's the difference between them? And so you could think, what's the difference between the two? What's the rock? What's the rock that the wise man builds on? You know, oftentimes people think that the rock is Jesus. Right? So you believe in Jesus, and so then your house stands firm. But that's not what the text says. That's not what Jesus says here. Jesus says that the wise man is like anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like the wise man. Anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. So that's a different thing, isn't it? So it's one thing to say we believe in Jesus and that we believe that we can build our house on him, but Jesus is saying you got to hear these words and you got to put them into practice. Oh, darn. So you actually have to do these things. And what are the things that you have to do? Well, it's the entire Sermon on the Mount. And it's all of the things that he's been talking about. And so putting those into practice means that the house will stand firm. And so then we have to ask the further question. So what is the house? What's the house mean? Well, we could speculate maybe about a bunch of different things, but I think it's pretty clear that the house is our life. The house is our life. It's the life that we've built over time. and that we're still continuing to build. And so the invitation is for us as we build our life to be able to build it on the practices, the teachings of Jesus. And that will allow us to stand when all of the adversity that life throws at us comes at us. And you don't have to look very far to find adversity in this life. Amen? Amen. It'll find you. It's just going to come get you. And so the question is whether we will be able to stand when adversity finds us. And this opportunity to be able to know we put these things into practice so that our life can stand and the people and things that we care about can endure. And so then the question becomes, so what are those things? Well, I said it's the entire Sermon on the Mount, but there are these individual practices or these individual teachings. And so now we want to go back with that context to go back to the lesson for this morning. And I'm just going to take the very first thing that Jesus talks about in this lesson. So this is the beginning of chapter 7. And it says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. In the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So it has to do with judgment, judging others. Well, so is that a big deal? So when we think of judging others is one of these practices that if it's not in place means that we're building our house on sand and our whole house, our life is threatened with collapse. Well, so then Jesus would take this issue of judging pretty seriously, right? Pretty seriously. It's a big issue. It's not a little issue, it's a big issue. So then let's look at this issue of judgment, what judgment is. And so there are two different things that judgment can be. One is the kind of judgment that allows us to discern between what's good and bad, what's right and wrong. And so if we talk about that kind of judgment or discernment, Jesus isn't condemning that. He's not criticizing that. In fact, that kind of judging, that kind of discerning is something that is important for our growth and development from the time we're little kids. So when a parent says, little Sally, don't go out into the road without holding my hand, she's not condemning the child. She's just saying, don't do that because I care about you. I'm coming alongside you. I want to make sure you get what you need. When we get into school, we take tests. And if you study really hard, you're probably going to do better on the test. And if you don't study really hard, you're going to bring home a C or a D or maybe even an F. And so those grades are judgments on our ability to carry out a certain task. And it's critical that kids learn, when they're able to have mastered a subject in order to be able to grow and develop as a human being. So this issue around discerning continues with us all of our life, and it's the opportunity for us to receive wisdom from others who know more than we do. But there's another kind of judgment, isn't there? And that kind of judgment has to do with a statement of value that gets placed on someone else by us that says somehow that person is inferior or is somehow not kind of up to a certain standard that we might take for granted that they ought to have known about and we do. So note then the implication is there's some kind of a ladder or pecking order on which I can look down at the people who are below me and kind of hold them to account for the ways in which they are not as high a level as I am. Well, so that kind of judging is destructive, right? But it is a part of our lives as we look at others and we make value judgments on the kinds of people these are, the things that they've accomplished, what their family lineage is, how much money they have, the color of their skin, their educational level, all of those things that we continue to kind of carry with us. So what is Jesus saying here? So don't do that? He's just saying to judge others is a bad thing? And so then he's slapping our hands? Well, if he did that, then he would be judging us for judging others. So he'd be judging us for judging others when we judge others by judging us, right? So that doesn't make any sense. Jesus isn't judging us. And by the way, Jesus doesn't slap hands. He doesn't ever kind of smack us and make us in order to be able to make us feel somehow shame or guilt about what it is that we've done. There is this opportunity for us to be able to hear, though, the words of Jesus in a way that he's coming alongside of us and telling us, just like a kid as we're growing up and a teacher who cares for us, to be able to say, you know, if you judge others, something's happening in you. Something destructive is happening in you and in your relationship with others, and it will taint and poison all of the other things that you see. Because as we judge others, now there's this standard, this ladder, and by judging others who are below us unintentionally, we put ourselves on this ladder in which now not only are we able to judge others, but others are able to judge us. Others who are higher, others who are smarter, others who have more than we do, others are able to look down on us. And so we don't like the idea of being looked down on others or being judged. And so we protect ourselves from it. We're afraid of being judged in that way. You know, the difference between this kind of judging and the other kind of judging is when somebody discerns about my life and gives me genuine wisdom about it and helps me to do something that makes my life better. What comes out of me is gratitude. It's thank you so much for helping me and for letting me kind of make things better. But this kind of judgment, what comes out of me is shame, guilt, fear, anxiety. And so being on that ladder introduces those things into my life. And always I am kind of on the alert, waiting for this secret life of mine to be exposed, and for me to be shamed or made to feel guilty about the things that I've done or who I am. And so Jesus comes. In order to be able to get rid of this pecking order, in order to be able to get rid of the influence of this scale, completely to be able to free us so that we don't have to worry about the judgments that are still coming. I remember when I was at Wheaton. Wheaton College is outside of Chicago, and there was a required chapel service that everybody had to go to at least once a week. And there were hundreds of kids that were in the chapel, and there was assigned seating. And so you had to sit wherever it was that they told you that you needed to sit. But we never knew the order. You know, we never knew the reason for kind of what the ranking was for among the students. So sometimes it was by birthdays. And so people who were January 1st started in one end, and it worked its way back through December. Sometimes it was by majors. So education majors sat with political science majors or biology majors. There are all of these different ways of being able to rank the students and have them fill out the seating chart. Well, one semester, nobody could figure out what it was. You know, there's this game trying to figure out what is it that kind of ranks us together. And there was a rumor that went around, and it was that the ranking or the seating chart was determined by people's SAT scores. Well, when, when, when you tell a bunch of college kids, there's nothing more important than SAT scores, right? And when you tell them that it's by SAT scores, then all of a sudden you're kind of looking around. Who's behind you? Who's in front of you? Who's at the very end? And who's at the beginning? You know, there's this anxiety about who you are. But it ties into this deeper anxiety that all of us carry around in us until Jesus. Until Jesus. So Jesus on the cross bears the price of our judgment, and he sets us free. And so for all of the inclinations of our hearts wanting to be able to judge so that we can feel better for ourselves, Jesus comes to put the whole game to rest. You remember the story about the woman caught in adultery, and the religious leaders come and they practically carry and throw her down on the ground in front of Jesus. Do you remember? And they say, this woman's been caught in adultery. Give us permission. So they've all got rocks in their hands. Give us permission and we'll stone her to death. And Jesus' response, you remember? So he sees the hypocrisy. He sees, last time I looked, adultery took 2 people. Is that right? So the guy is where? Well, maybe he's there with a rock. I don't know. So tell us, just give us the word and we'll stone her to death. And then do you remember Jesus' response? Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone. Very simple, isn't it? It's amazing how simple things can be. And then this is what I love about the leadership of Jesus. So you can imagine the emotion in this bloodthirsty crowd just wanting to impose their righteousness, right? And Jesus just doesn't have it, not for a second. Not upset, not angry that we can tell. He just calls it. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And then he gets down on his knees. And he starts with his finger, he just starts squiggling in the sand. What does he write? I don't know. The gospel writer doesn't tell us what he writes. Maybe he's just doodling in the sand, just allowing the silence and the Spirit of God to work in people's minds and hearts. Maybe he's writing names of people who are standing there. He knows them. Maybe he's writing out the 10 Commandments. We don't know. But I love this silence that's there, where the full weight of what's going on in their minds and in their hearts can bubble to the surface, to the place where they can't deny it. And so in the silence, after I think probably a while, suddenly there's a thump, and somebody's rock just hits the ground. And the gospel writer tells us that slowly the crowd begins to dissipate, begins to fade away. And I love this insight from the gospel writer. He says, slowly the crowd begins to dissipate. The oldest men first. Isn't that a penetrating insight? The oldest men first. This time in our life as we get older, that we have the opportunity for wisdom. And wisdom comes because you've had life experience that has shown you the kind of person that you have been. And the different ways in which you have not lived up to your standards. And you know how difficult life can be. And so at a time when I get afraid that sometimes we feel like getting older gives us some kind of preeminence in our culture. For Jesus, it is getting older provides for us the opportunity to be able to look at life realistically and to be able to allow humility to fill us as we come to terms with the kind of person that I am and the kind of person that I want to be, and how it is that I can surrender myself into a bigger way of living in relationship with others. And so the older guys, they're the ones who leave first. And the younger guys see their example, see their modeling of wise and healthy behavior, and they follow. This question of what kind of house is it that we seek to build, and this question of spiritual formation. You know, we think of spiritual formation perhaps as the list of tools, like reading the Bible or coming to church or saying your prayers, that all of those things are tools, and they are tools. But they are tools in order for us to be able to deal more successfully with this challenge of who I am and the kind of grace that I need in order to be able to live my daily life. And so what kind of a house it is that I build in which love and acceptance and openness and creativity flow, and not hand slapping and judgment and distancing. And it becomes even more important as we deal with not just the peripheral issues of people who are distant out there that we don't know, but those who are closest to us. So have you ever been shamed by a spouse? Have you ever shamed a child in order to get them to conform? Or been shamed by a family member or by a boss? And experience what it means for the vitality of life just to be choked off and to feel yourself smaller because of this new exposure that you've received. The building of our house, the kind of life we want to live, the kind of relationship that we can have with our kids and with our grandkids that is based not on hand slapping and not on shame, but this opportunity to be able to come alongside, to be able to lift them up, to be able to give ourselves as servants to them so that they can be more fully free to be the people God has called them to be. That is spiritual formation. Dallas Willard, in his book, The Divine Conspiracy, Dallas Willard is a writer on the spiritual life who just recently died. And in this book, he deals at some length with the Sermon on the Mount. And for this particular passage, he reflects on his experience as a young boy. He grew up in the Great Depression and in the Dust Bowl. And his mother, when he was about 2 years old, was tragically killed in a farm accident. And they had a family business of a kind of a country store, and it went belly up, just bankrupt. And so the father, in order for them to be able to survive, needed to hand the kids out to different people. He had an older brother who had just recently gotten married and had a couple of kids of their own, and so he handed young Dallas off to his brother's house to go and live with he and his wife and the kids that they had. And so if you can imagine, Great Depression, all of the challenges that they were facing, and now all of a sudden, he's getting his little brother and his wife. Now all of a sudden, if they had any privacy at all, it's gone out the window. All of this, plenty of opportunity for shaming and for guilt and for all of those things. But that wasn't his experience with his brother and sister-in-law. So he says this. Among them, I quickly noticed children were to be heard as well as seen. And then he says, how brutal that saying is, children are to be seen and not heard. As I watched their children through the years and grew up along with their grandchildren, the same non-condemnatory spirit seemed on the whole to prevail throughout all of their lives. Never once in all those years or since did she ever condemn the sister-in-law. Did she ever condemn or blame me, though I frequently deserved it. I thought in those years long ago that it was just her way. Now I understand it was her heart, which she learned from her father and mother, and through them, from Christ. This question of building a life, based on what? Based on what principles, what values, what perspectives, the kinds of people and the kind of community, the kind of household that allows folks to be able to know that they're not there to get their hands slapped or somehow to be felt inferior to the other people who are around because because of whatever arbitrary standard of measurement they have. But to be able to know that the people in it are safe and that each person is able to be transparent in terms of who they are and what they want and where it is that they want to go and what it is that they want to become and to do, and to know that the rest of the people in the household are there to advocate for them, to be there for them, to do everything that they can to raise them up and to be servant leaders for them, that becomes the purpose of their life. That's spiritual formation. That's the building of a life. And so now Jesus gives us this challenge. So having gone through the Sermon on the Mount, what do we do with it? Where do we go? How does God change us? What is it that God does in us? If we reduce our spiritual life to a series of practices, I don't know that we'll get very far. Perhaps that will put us higher on a ladder that allows us to condemn other people who don't pray as much or read the Bible as much as we do. But if we're able to absorb the heart of his teaching and to see ourselves as people desperately in need of grace and mercy, and willing to then come alongside and engage with those who have the same story as we are, the opportunities are endless. And the gifts, priceless. It's a good thing to be thinking about as we wind up Lent. How is it that we build a house? What is it that Christ desires to do in us? Amen.